And welcome everyone. Nice to virtually see you. I couldn't be there in person today because I'm kind of sick, so I thought of just maybe staying home. But good to be here. Wondering, like, Isabella, are you there by any chance? Because I know that we were kind of like waiting. Um,
Hi, yeah, I'm here.
hey. All right. Well, thank you for being here again, everyone. My name is Ricardo Perez Gonzalez. I am the artist in residence that is serving this semester with you all. And this is my first artist launch, I guess my second one. But it's the first time that I get to bring one of my friends, one of my peers. And we just basically wanted to have a pretty laid back conversation. So, yeah, I actually wanted to maybe open us up just reading a quick quote from the Zapatista movement here that says, "We're nothing if we walk alone, we're everything when we walk together in step with other dignified feet." And I think like the way that I came to meet Isabella and their art very much looks and sounds like that. So without further ado, Isabella, I'm wondering if you maybe wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, telling us a bit about yourself, and then we can, like follow with the questions and your art. So, would you mind introducing yourself? Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, Dios, hola Isabela. Hello everybody, my name is Isabela. Yeah, I've been organizing and doing art since 2020. I've worked with a lot of other indigenous groups from United Nations to COP at the Climate Conference to here locally at Indigenous Roots and also at Little Earth. Right now I'm working with NIAC, the Native Youth Art Collective. We're basically, making a film for um, like the community right now, which has been pretty dope. And also, I run my own open mic called Echo with the Earth at Indigenous Roots, where we encourage like Black and Brown youth just to like actually use and like unravel their own voice. I feel like now more than ever, people need to understand who they are as a person, especially with just these different, sides that are coming about for different topics. And so, yeah, so I'm gonna share a poem with you guys, and this is actually the poem that kind of started a lot of my organizing, and that was when the Vanessa Guillen case was still up in arms, and that a lot of Latino community members were very concerned about. And I think the reason why people were very concerned about this was because of the fact that, we often see this in our communities where women um, constantly, abused and raped, or authorities don't tend to like Black and brown women than they do to other women. And so it was really a cry out for urgency of just the military to also understand like their role and how like they played in that as well. And so yeah, this is kind of my poem of like how I I shared this at the protest, and this is where I also met Ricardo, and that's where we kind of started organizing with art together. Um, yes. If she is a woman, prepare her for a life that seems to be the truth, for a life that seems like she'll never escape, fleeing and crying at the door that does not exist in her mind, thinking as though my voice is present, but no one understands the message of my letters. They only hear a cry that makes no sense. Only those who know how to love can hear her song, honey of her life tips that melt from her mouth. Some people only want to kiss her to steal it, but with her true loved ones, she gives away her gifts, same tongue that produces her sweet words, but they do not want to hear the drums of her soul, that her heart is full of echoes of traumas. They do not see that her body is of a woman warrior, refuge for battles. One way or another, women will always discover that men invade what is not theirs, colonizing their body, undressing them of their humanity. They do not understand that the word woman also means person. That just like men, the creator themselves crafted her in his image, maintaining her power to fly way beyond man's version of success, creasing into her dreams. She carries the weight, the sin of life in her soul, scars in her roots, a pain that her ancestors transmit, her wings full black spots she carries on her back, the insults, the lies of the system. Why don't you see her for the truth that she is? That she's more than just a mother, a sister, a daughter, a friend, a woman, but that she is human. That was one of the pieces I have for you guys. I wrote that one 4 years ago, so it's been a minute, but I think it kind of pertains a lot to, um, yeah, um, especially what's going on right now. I think that sometimes we don't realize how much when something is objectified, it can be that much more valid to cause violence towards. And I know there's a lot going on with Palestine, and I think regardless of where people are at with the issue, I think it's safe to say that any abuse and any war of that type of regard it's not okay. So yeah.
Thank you, Isabella. And yeah, I remember though. So that was 4 years ago. Man, 10 flies. And I know I have a question set up to maybe talk about more about that event specifically, because I think that's a cool memory to bring up. But before we get there, I just want to say thank you for sharing your art with us. And speaking of art, as you know, I don't want to call it an experiment, but the intentionality to be here today is about art and social justice. So I guess this question is more about like, what is your earliest memory of art, and what is your earliest memory of feeling powerful? Trying to understand, maybe some of those roots that inspire you today or that have led you to be out there, like being in a protest, like with your art, like I think that it'll be interesting to know if there's anything specific about those early memories around art and power that you wouldn't mind sharing. Maybe even about like, I don't know, like if you were born here, where your family comes from, like where are you rooted that makes you feel powerful? So would you mind sharing a little bit with us?
Yeah, for sure. I think the earliest memory of art for me was when my mom would gather the family together and cook. I think that cooking is a form of art, and I would see that with my tías and my abuela, and just the way that they would gather the family together and the ways that they would do that. Um, I think to me was art. But I think at the time I didn't realize that. I didn't know that until later on, when I started, organizing, understanding why art is so essential in the first place, and looking at it more in a decolonizing perspective. Because I grew up going to Oaxaca, Mexico, which I feel like, and that's where my family's from, and I feel like that's like indigenous art capital of Mexico, period. And the reason why I say that is because every town, every pueblo has like their own way of either cultivating something or crafting something. And it's a form of how they connect to themselves and how they connect through community is through creating and making something. And so, sorry, my computer got weird. But yes, and so for me, I think art is just the human cry of being alive and being present. And I think that more than ever right now, we need art. Like we need art, we need a space where we can create and understand and process our emotions, of what's going on, and whether it be writing, whether it be painting, whether it be even organizing. I think that's a form of art. And so I think where I really started to feel powerful in myself was when I started writing. I was about like when I was in sixth grade and I was like 10, 11. And yeah, and I didn't realize how much power could be behind a pen.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, I grew up in Mexico, and I know that yeah, the power and the value that we give to our women, like I didn't realize it also until I moved up here, when I continue to see those patterns where yeah, like women bring the family together. And then as of more recently with like organizing, And I guess this is about kids as well, but it kind of like tells a quick story on like if you have a ball, like kids will come and play, and if the kids come out and play, then the parents and the moms will come out for their children, and then that brings out the man, and then the whole family becomes like materializes. And I think
Exactly.
like and I think that's the same with our food, with our traditions, like how you know our women are the carriers of that culture, of that power. And it's cool to hear that you continue to tap into that here in a different language, like that you're using to express yourself. So I think that's pretty cool. Um, so just out of curiosity, is there a favorite meal that you have from Oaxaca at all, or something that you maybe want to share?
Mole.
Mole?
I love mole de Oaxaca. Like,
Yeah,
but like that sauce is just like I could eat that all day. Like,
absolutely. It's so good. Um, So I guess so this next question, I guess it was like thinking more about, so we're talking a little bit about like where you come from, where you're rooted in, and then kind of like talking about a little bit about today, or maybe even 4 years ago when we happened to encounter each other out in this protest. I guess like the question is, and you kind of mentioned it already, but it's like, how do you think art influences social justice, or how do you think it complements each other? I know you talked about it briefly earlier, but can you maybe tell us why is art important when we're thinking about like social justice? Have you noticed that it speaks to a different kind of people, or it allows you to express yourself? Like, I don't know, just curious about how do you see that connection. And again, I'm maybe curious, maybe we can start like when we were out there with the protest with Vanessa Guillen. Like how did you find out about that? How were you called? Because I know for us they were like, hey, we there's a protest happening, can you come? And was that kind of similar for you, or could you maybe tell us a little bit about how that happened for you?
yeah, I remember at that point I started organizing with some girls, also like we're at IROOTS, and we were just kind of like, yeah. Also, we had this older organizer, Jason, who did that. I met him, and that's where I kind of roped in everybody else. And so at that point, I think a lot of the brown community here in Minnesota was also eager to come out and represent something as well, to stand by a cause. And I remember thinking as we were trying to like craft up what the um like how was it going to look like for the protests, and like what are the different elements that we want. The biggest thing that we were saying is like we have to have art, because like that's just part of our culture. Like that is from like murals to like the way that we make clay or meeting. Like art is a ray within, you know, like brown culture, period. Like it's part of who we are. And so right away we were able to get Ricardo, and his friends to do a mural as we did it, and we were able to get poets, and got different like aspects where it can be a visual way of learning, people like understanding to connect and understand what's going on. And so I know for me, the reason why it was so important to do this protest in particular is because I think during that time was also genocide movement against in Mexico. And so a lot of people were talking about that in Mexico, and there were so many protests going on there. And so for me, it's kind of my way. Although, like, I'm Chicana, but I'm very much the the awareness of violence towards women in our community is very much there, and it's with, and it's something that's very close to me. So it was just kind of like I wanted to do it not just for Vanessa, but for all the other girls in our culture, in our community, because I feel like we sometimes, a lot of times, we take away our voice, and sometimes we can't even produce our voice or understand our voice because we don't have a way to formulate it. We don't have a way to create from it. And that's why I feel like art is so essential, is because it allows a person to express themselves in a way that is different. They experiment and understand. It's also a way where people can give back. And it's really, I see it something that's really sacred, and something where like find yourself, you find your voice, and knowing that like as you're taking it upon yourself make it like somebody else can visually see it, interpret it for what it wants to be as. And so yeah, like with the Venezuelan protest, that poem actually I originally wrote in Spanish because the biggest thing for me was I really wanted to write peace for my community, for like people to understand it first, and so that's why it was important for me to write it in Spanish and then English because I really wanted to cater to my community.
And
So
Isabella, oh, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I think there is some sort of like audio issues happening where you're kind of getting cut off a little bit. And I know that you're dropping some knowledge right now. So I'm
ah,
curious, like, if you like turn off your video, could that maybe improve your audio? Because I think like your words, are so maybe
okay,
let's
yeah,
maybe let's try this for a sec to see if it changes the audio quality.
mhm,
And we can take it from there. Would that work for you?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. And folks on the room, hello. I hope you're following along. Please do let us know if the audio is good or not, or if you have any questions, you can also let us know. So, I will just maybe share back a little bit about what I'm hearing, and maybe you can add more, or we can move into the next one, Isabella. But I guess something that I heard you say that really resonated with me, it's about what art does to our communities. And when we think about our communities, we're thinking specifically Black, immigrant, indigenous people. And you talked about like it allows to like express yourself. So I guess like I'm just thinking like as an artist, like how like how does that make a difference from you, like being able to write a poem and express yourself that way? How does that make you feel in that protest setting, like um so yeah, I don't know if you can maybe share a little bit more about where you were when you wrote that piece, what you had in mind. um and yeah, could you maybe elaborate a little bit more about that day and the art that you presented there? And I'm also trying to see if your audio is better too, so.
Hello, can you hear me? Is this better?
Yes.
But yeah, like yeah. So when I first wrote that and I wrote in Spanish, I was really nervous because honestly, like I was as somebody who grew up in the States, I was a bit nervous to share my Spanish because I know for like, second generation kids, we get a lot of heaviness for that, which is fine. But I remember specific like being very no, like I need to do this in Spanish. I need to do this for my community because like and writing it felt very natural. I remember thinking that. I remember it felt very yeah, it felt like it was almost like it needed to come out of me at that time of that period. And so when I wrote it and I performed it in front of everybody, it was very nerve-wracking because it was the first time I ever performed in Spanish. But I mean, since then I've been doing it. And so it allowed me to find a different voice I didn't even know I had or empowered by a different language that I've been with my whole life, and I can also create it within my own understanding. Um, and so yeah, I think doing that empowered me on so many levels to understand that like my voice is that much more dynamic than what I thought it was. And so that's why I feel like art is so essential for anybody, period, because it allows a person to understand like their own emotions and like how dynamic it can be, and when I say this, I mean that like the process of when you are making something, the process of when you are, going through emotions and understanding and crafting things, you learn a lot about yourself. And, when you look at that piece and you reflect back at it, you remember the person you were. And, for me, it's like I have that much more heart for that person. I have that much more love for, just who I was. And that's something that I want to be able to keep showing, especially with girls like me or just any black, brown, indigenous women or just women period, honestly too. 'Cause I think that we need that. I think that we hold a lot of knowledge. Um and so yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, audio is great, by the way, so I'm glad we kind of figure it out. But yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And I guess like what I'm also hearing you say, which to me is very important, it's like when you're like out in community, a couple things I guess. Well, it's like it takes courage to speak up, you know, like because we're taught and we're wired, you know, to remain silent, you know. So to speak up, it takes a lot of courage. And I guess as an artist myself, being in that protest myself as well, art really helped empower me to, like Isabella was saying, like, what is my voice here? What am I going to tell people? But I know that I have this feeling deep inside of me and that I need to do something about it, you know? So I guess, like, as I think about your own work as students or teachers, as pastors, you know, like, I do hope that you can see the connections between social justice, social movements, art, artists. We are a community. It is a village. You're hearing today that art is not just about an art product, but it's about our roots, our cultural roots, holding a space, bringing elements to a movement that resonates with different cultures. So the work that we do is very valuable and is very necessary to be inclusive of a different audience of people that maybe perhaps couldn't be reached with the usual methods of reading or listening. Um, so I guess like for this last question that we have prepared, doesn't mean that it's the end of our conversation, but something that I respect about you a lot, Isabella, is that you're very young, you know, and like I say that respectfully, you're part of like the youth collective, I guess, out there, uh, a place where I used to belong back in the day, but I find myself like a boat separating myself from that shore every year. But for you, you know, like when I think of you and what you're doing, it's like I see a lot of like wisdom, like in the future, you know, like in 25 years we're all gonna look very different. You know what I'm saying, like you really are gonna be out there in the future, you know. So I'm hoping that you can maybe put your futuristic, your visionary hat on and maybe talk to us from that future to today, you know, like what vision of the future do you hold, and what is the role of art and social justice, like when you're thinking about your traditions, where you come from, the injustices that we're enduring here, what is the opposite in your brain? Like what world can we tap into? So I don't know, what do you think? Have you Would you mind sharing a little bit with us about that?
Yeah, I feel like that's such a heavy question. It's so much pressure. I'm not gonna lie.
No pressure though, there is no wrong answer. It's just like really, again, just flexing that vision, you know, like, and feel free to answer whichever way you want. So yeah.
No, yeah, no, I appreciate the words. I appreciate like the whole question. Um, but yeah, I think a lot about what it comes to mind because one of my favorite art forms, and what you find a lot in resistant movements or even just like hip hop and how that came to be as an art form, was like the ingenuity of these communities. And like when you think about the Bronx in the 1970s, they had nothing. You know, when you think about indigenous people now in Mexico, like they don't have a lot, but what they do have, they make so much. And I feel like that ingenuity of love within like these unfortunate like communities is good. It's what's gonna lead us to the future. Because I feel like we've seen that time and time again in history. Like it's those little ideas that we take for granted and we don't understand is like really the ingenuity or the outside of thought, or outside the box perspective of societies that we didn't understand was there in the first place. And I think that art is a way to echo those perspective, those ideas, those opinions, even when people are not listening, like art literally gets people's attention because of its beauty, or or lack thereof, regardless of what it is. And so, yeah, I really do believe it's within the people, it's within just the hearts of, yeah, of the people that don't have a lot. And I say this from a place of just like just seeing my dad and his story, he came from an indigenous pueblo, a Zapotec indigenous pueblo from Mexico. And, he came here to the States and like, he owns his own real estate company. Um, but just his like his fortitude, his like, yeah, just his willingness to keep going and understanding he has a whole family that he wants to provide, back in Mexico and here is like, yeah, like that's what I know is going to keep us forward in this life. And so I would say that.
Thank you. No, that's huge. That's I think that's very substantial, very deep, what you're sharing early on about the role of art. And and yeah, I mean, I think that's very, very powerful. To me, that's the big lesson that we can take today. It's about what can art do, and I guess, as I'm sitting here, I'm really hoping that you all on the school, on that room, you can also, try to, because I know it's very complicated to put yourself in other person's shoes, someone that you might not know at all. But I think a lot about the changing demographics in this country of like immigrants like Isabel's family, like my family, and what are we doing in the spiritual community to adapt to the needs of this growing base that we have here. I also know that our communities are very religious people that many times populate churches in large numbers, and I hope that you all can see, the connection, the dots, the opportunities to, do work to authentically, meaningfully connect with our communities and find ways of serving the cause that we're fighting for, which is justice. So yeah. So I know we still have some time left. We had these three questions prepared, but I know it's an intimate room. I know this is being recorded, but since we're a few people in the room, I don't know, maybe we can open it up to the room to see if y'all have any questions, thoughts, reflections, on what you're hearing today. And for you to have some time with Isabel as well, anything you want to ask. So before we do that though, Isabel, is there anything you would like to maybe close us up with today? Any words of wisdom, advice, anything that you want to plug in that you have coming up? I posted like an Instagram link on the chat where y'all can visit Isabel's open mic stuff and whatnot. So please do check it out. But Isabel, anything else before we go to the room?
Yeah, basically that. On November 10th at Indigenous Roots on the East Side St. Paul, we're going to be having our next Echo with the Earth open mic. And the whole point of it, last time we actually dissected a poem from Irman Pineda, which is a Zapotec poet. And, she's been fighting for her pueblo for a minute. And we kind of dissected one of her pieces and how that relates back to the war that's going on right now. And that was actually a really good time. So we have a poetry workshop at 6 and then at 7:30 the open mic. So yeah, it's supposed to be for youth. So if anybody that, like would enjoy it, please let them know.
Thank you. Maybe the teachers will give extra credit if the students attend. I'm just saying. Just kidding. Not really. So yeah, folks, Tuesday, things are changing out there. What is the room feeling like, thinking? Any questions, thoughts? How you doing?
Well, yeah, thank you, Isabel, for sharing with us. It's very interesting to hear your story. I guess I'd be interested to know, like, if you've seen a shift in your poetry or what you have been writing about since getting involved in organizing, or if it feels like it's been offline, or yeah, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. I feel like it shifted a lot, so much. Just reading that poem, I'm like, I felt like I was reading someone else's diary. Um, but yeah, my poetry has changed a lot. I feel like it's a lot more personal. It's a lot more tangible. I'm playing a lot more with just different languages and the dynamic of like growing up with Spanish and English, and also mixing in a little bit like, indigenous tongue in there. And so yeah, just kind of playing with language now is kind of where I'm at, but still playing. with with what I'm just living in, period, and the emotions behind it, and making it more personal is just because I really want people to relate to it. So yeah, I would say that.
Thank you, Isabel. This is Rye talking. And I can show my face. Thanks so much. I have a question about you've talked a lot about how your art is rooted in indigenous roots, right? The name of the organization, but also your own roots. And I guess I have a question about the relationship between roots and routes, ROUTES. So like roots, your roots in Mexico, and then also the routes, right? That your family took through movements, through and then kind of how that is reflected in your poetry. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but the relationship between roots and doing art sort of through our roots, and then also thinking about art as something that we do in route, right? In this history of movement, right? Where we don't, where we are on the move, where we encounter new people and new cultures, new forms of exchange, of sharing, and learning new kinds of
Yeah,
processes,
for sure.
practices.
Yeah, it makes me think of a lot of things actually when you say that. It makes me think of it makes me think about like the Renaissance period and how like during that time period a lot of people, wouldn't understand each other, with the routes that they would have, but one thing that they could understand was the art, and the exchange between that, during that time. And it also makes me think about how, before in the Americas where it was just indigenous people, they've been migrating and trading from north and south for centuries. And they would do the same, when it came to trading, their their arts, their traditions, and just, their way of living. I know, I don't know if you guys know about ribbon skirts, but one thing that they say is that the ribbon skirt was actually gifted from the south to the north. Um, and so I think about that a lot. I think about how, back when there wasn't technology, back when, things I guess were more simpler. I think art really unique way to communicate something, or just the craftsmanship behind it. And so, yeah, I would say for me, my route specifically is thinking about how do I cater to my roots? Because I feel like right now more than ever, I can speak about this. I just feel like we're losing a lot of our own roots, period. And I think that's dangerous even for the environment. And I think when we come back to that, we're also finding our own relationship with the earth and understanding where we come from as well. And so that's something I've been thinking a lot about and also challenging. I know one thing for sure. I think when I do write my book, I really want to call it Bordados and Borders, because bordados is what is a way, where we I don't know how to say it in English. I forgot the word. But basically, it's like when you make I forgot what you make art with sewing. I forgot what it is in English. And then borders, just understanding that like the knowing that we can't some it's kind of because of where we're at now in this country, like, and same thing in Mexico, like it's so much more harder to have that flow happen, come back to my roots or yeah. And so I don't know if that answered the question.
Thank you.
If I may add, and not to take away the spotlight from Isabela, and because I think what you answered is on point, but just to share on that note, it's like I think I share with you how it's like being an artist, and I love what Isabel is bringing about not academic certified artists, right? This is like a experiential artist. Like you're living your life and you're expressing yourself through these methods, but as you're looking around you in this very interesting experience, which is life, you try to find similarities about what you're going through in the world. I mean, this country has a very dominant culture that is white, and you can see yourself reflected in that culture. But for for me, it was hard to find myself, you know, and I think something very beautiful that came out of this journey, it's like we saw like that this movement and the roots and the routes like are natural to this world, like our communities, you know, and we see the monarch butterfly, how it's, you know, its home starts in Mexico and it then migrates all the way to Minnesota, you know. So you don't have to go too far to find poetry, to find movements, to find roots, routes. It's out there in the natural world. And to me, and I dare to say this in this spiritual setting, that's the word of God. You know what I'm saying? Like butterflies are migrating. Like that's all that you should know to understand the nature of our existence, you know? So I just wanted to say that inspired by what Isabel is saying. So what else? What you all think? Any who else is in the room actually? I know there's two more people. I don't think I've met you. No, would you maybe mind introducing yourself since we're in a closed setting? If you don't want to, that's cool, but just curious.
So, I appreciate all this conversation today. I'm Justin Saviatanis. I'm an associate professor here and the director of the Social Transformation Program. And I get to work with these lovely folks on the Leadership Center for Social Justice.
Hi, I'm Elliot. I am a student.
Thanks, Elliot. If I may be honest, I was mostly curious about your shirt, which I really like from far away, and I wanted to look at
Here's
that.
the thing, there used to be a store in Minnesota, in this very city, well, actually, we're in St. Paul. It used to be in Minneapolis, the store where you could get unlimited cowboy shirts, and it recently closed, and I'm very sad about it, so that's my tragedy of the year.
The memory remains. Great.
Through you.
So I don't know, what other thoughts, questions, or maybe we can ask you, or Isabella, do you have any question for the room? Like you kind of heard a little bit who's here. You don't have to, but I'm just, you know, like want to make sure that we use this time the best that we can. And I know that sometimes when we ask you questions, good things might arise. So maybe I can start asking you all, do you use art on your daily practice, whether it's with your communities or as a student? How do you yourself perceive art? And I know that we talked to Stella and Raya a lot, but curious about our actual participants today. What do you think? Would you feel comfortable sharing with us a little bit about that? Or is that too much to turn it on you?
Do you want to?
I can go, but I don't want to go first.
Okay. So I have my own art practice, which is mostly photography and colored pencils, and that's more for my own chilling out, personal in that way. But as a scholar, I've studied. I used art in my dissertation as a method to learn about the spirituality in the LGBTQ community. Like, how do people outside of religious institutions express really strong spirituality? But and how should we listen to and respect those expressions, especially for communities that have been forced out of religious institutions? So for me, it's both. And I just love art. So you know, going to a museum is my happy place. But you know, or going to an art gallery or a protest that has great art. But I also think it's a way for us. It's another way for us to learn. And I was thinking what you were talking. One of the artists that I studied for my dissertation was Isavela Lopez, and the way she uses viceroy butterflies because they're in her work. Because not only do they migrate between Mexico and America, but they're not poisonous like monarchs. They mimic the monarch. They look just the same or almost the same. And talking about like what does it mean to have all these all these links between Mexico and the U.S. and one of her images of the Virgin, instead of having a little angel holding them up, it's a viceroy butterfly. So
thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
So now we know who to call if we need a photographer for a protest then. But we do need you. We need to document.
Yes.
Okay, can we move and I'm sorry, your name escapes me because I was multitasking, but you didn't want to go first. Are you ready
Elliot.
now,
That is
Elliot?
correct. Yeah, I make art as a personal and public practice. I identify as an iconographer. That's what I make. Generally things that try to express like queer experiences in the language of like iconography and that sort of visual language. I consider it my way of engaging in like queer like justice without actually having to go to a protest because I can't go to protests because I freak out. So that's what I do instead. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And yeah, nowadays with technology, I think all sorts of participation could be possible. But no, thank you for sharing. I mean, how about Stella and Rai? Anything else to others? Stella, what do you do any art, Stella?
I do. I tend to be kind of interdisciplinary. I
Okay.
struggle to land on one one format, but I do like poetry and watercolor and weaving, things like that. Yeah, just kind of as a way to process. I liked what Isabella said about the human cry of being alive. Kind of just a way to like, yeah, to process being a human amongst other humans.
Sure. I won't ask Rai because I know his art is pizza making. But spoiler for the
Didn't want
room.
to ask me.
But so I really hope because I know this is like a lunch, casual, having your meal, but I really hope. And sorry, I don't mean to jump you, right? I was kind of serious that it's pizza, but super quickly, I wanted to say, I hope that these lunches are not just like a painting in a museum, but this can be a moment where that can lead us to action. So if you like are interested in reaching out to Isabela for her to come and share some poetry with your people in your space, we can share the contact info for all of you who might be watching this recording. We'll make sure that you have that available to you. We really hope that this can be an invitation for you to tap into art, to tap into artists that come from backgrounds that are not academic, for you to experience, for you to try new things on how you are a human amongst humans and what kind of connections and relationships you're building. So all that to say, I'm wondering if Isabela, is there any words you would like to close us up with today? Anything that emerged as you were sharing today, thinking about your culture, where you are today, about the vision of the future?
Yeah, I would say this may be a lot of pocket. I would say the zeitgeist is shifting. I would say that I think I think more than ever right now we just really need to be the most authentic who we are in our own voices, but that needs to be challenged within ourselves. And I think art is a great way to do that. So yeah, I would say that. And by juice, I hope everybody has a great day. And thank you for having me. Really appreciate the conversation and thought and just for everybody's at. But yeah.
Thank you, Isabella.
Thank you.
It looks like Ricardo's paused. Thanks so much.
For sure, for sure, for sure. No, yeah, thank y'all so much. This is great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.